the Olympic Airways plane that almost crashed into Central Athens. On 9 August 1978, an Olympic Airways jet came close to crashing in Central Athens. However, the pilot managed to avoid the disaster in just the last seconds of the flight. It was a very warm day in August when 400 passengers boarded the Olympic Airways Flight 411 to New York. One of them was the U.S. citizens returning back from their summer vacations in Greece. There were almost 18 crew members present on this long-distance flight. Captain Sifis Migadis, who was the main pilot, was in charge of flying the 370-ton jumbo jet, and he had 32 years of flying experience. Right next to him was the co-pilot, Constantinos Fikardos, who was also a seasoned pilot with whom Migadis flew frequently. What transpired in just 93 seconds on that day will be engraved in the minds of 418 passengers aboard for eternity who were on Olympic Airways Boeing 747. Takeoff. The crew fastened their seats and the airways set on the runway for takeoff at 2 p.m. on that day. The jet carried 160 tons of fuel as it would fly straight from Athens to New York. The aircraft was unable to climb high enough during the takeoff, and before the jet's wheels could lift off the ground, an explosion was heard from the engine on the right, which had been damaged apparently. Migadis wasn't able to stop the plane, so he ordered the co-pilot to pick up the wheels to continue the takeoff. Concurrently, the flight engineer, in response to the warning, cut off the water by turning off the water injection system in all the engines. This significantly impacted the plane's tendency to climb, as the plane lost 4,500 pounds of thrust. Captain Migadis was constantly struggling to get the 747 up high enough, and the people from the ground control anticipated that the plane would crash into the city of Athens. Even with the minimum altitude, the pilot managed to clear the first hindrance, which was a hill in the neighborhood of Alamos, 200 meters high. The pilot was able to fly at an altitude of only 685 feet before the plane started to lose altitude again. Simultaneously, the co-pilot Fikardos was sending out desperate emergency signals to the control tower. The alarms at the airport rang out as the huge jumbo aircraft flew over the apartment buildings, Kalithia and Nea Smyrni, almost scratching the top of the Inter-American building of Sirgro Avenue. The stewardess reported that they could look outside from the window and see employees who were working in their offices utterly dumbfounded. At that time, the jet was flying at a speed of just 160 miles per hour, and it was at an incredible height of 55 meters above the ground. The pilot decides to crash on a hill. As Migadis knew the law of aerodynamics wonderfully, he chose to keep the jet stable in a horizontal position. As he explained in an interview, Migadis violated many aviation rules in attempts to keep his plane in the air. The pilot decided not to turn around and try to get out of the situation at hand. Migadis decided to keep the plane straight ahead. He decided to crash the plane in a remote area as he tried to get it to Mount Eglio. The two men in the cockpit remained silent in those heart-throbbing 93 seconds. Meanwhile, the engineer wretchedly tried to repair the engines in any way possible, while the pilots kept themselves calm and collected. This is the reason why most of the flyers didn't know what was going on, and thought that the low flight over Athens was planned. In fact, some of them were taking pictures from the windows as the plane glided above the rooftops. A light breeze at 2:05 p.m. assisted the Boeing 747 climb a few feet higher, which climbed with the reduced water, helped the jet turn slightly before the plane crashed into Mount Eglio. Landing at Elenikin. A moments before the plane crashed into Mount Eglio, the pilot made a last-second decision and carried out some last-resort maneuvers, in which he was able to turn around and return to Elenikin. As there was no correspondence from the cockpit, the people in the tower had no idea what was going on. When they discerned the Boeing 747 returning from Piraeus, they couldn't believe their eyes. Migadis flew over the sea, which is near Piraeus, and pumped out some of the fuel, making the jet lighter. This allowed the jumbo jet back safely to Elenikin and land it. The plane's appearance was acknowledged with ecstatic applause from the ground. When Migadis set his foot off the plane, he saw his two daughters waiting for him. The two were notified by a cousin, who had seen the jet flying a few meters above the Panionios football pitch and alerted them that it almost hit the light pylons and would have crashed. The plane landing in a populated area was all due to Migadis' composure, skills, and experience, which undoubtedly saved thousands of lives. The jet also flew at such a low altitude. Even the engineers from Boeing admitted that it was not possible for the aircraft to stay in the air at such low speeds. After the near disaster, Migadis, like the brave man he was, placed his existence in a replacement jet, and at 6 p.m., he flew with the rest of the crew and 400 passengers to New York. Migadis himself stated in an interview, "Those of us who survived that day are stowaways in life."